Today, the federal NDP is officially launching its leadership race after a devastating defeat in the last federal election. Former leader Jagmeet Singh resigned from the role after losing his seat in that election, and he wasn't the only one who lost his spot in Parliament. The NDP went into the election with 24 MPs, but they came away with just 7, with the party receiving just 6.3% of the vote. Candidates looking to throw their name in as the party's next leader will have some hurdles to clear, including paying a $100,000 entry fee and gathering 500 signatures from party members. The leadership campaign is set to last for about 7 months, and the results will be announced at the party's convention at the end of March. Well, Nathan Cullen previously served as a BC NDP MP, and he himself ran for leader back in 2012, and he joins me now. Nathan Cullen, good to see you, sir.
Nice to see you, David.
So, Party President Mary Shortall, fellow Newfoundlander, said today that this leadership race will spark important conversations about the kind of future they want to build together as a party. I mean, where do you think this party needs to be at the end of these important conversations?
Well, I think there's a role for the party itself within. The conversation you always have in these leadership races is internal inherently. People sign members up and they become voting participants in the race, but with always an eye to what's happening in our country. What is the country looking for? What does the country need? What will voters be interested in come 2, 3, 4 years from now when we're back at the polls? It feels to me that the devastating results of the last election are important, but one should not obsess on them because the context will be different. We're going to have a new leader, obviously. Canadians will be in a different place. The context around what happened in the last election, as important as it was and as hard as it was to lose so many good members of parliament, that will not be the context of the next election. Hopefully, we won't have a U.S. president threatening to take the country over again, and hopefully inflation will be less and it won't be the dominant issue that it was last time around. So picking a leader that can connect, I know that's easy to say, sometimes harder to do, but also is squarely focused on the progressive set of values that have always drawn people to the NDP, and I think are in real need right now because we have this almost violent agreement going on between Liberals and Conservatives in the House of Commons about some pretty big issues. Right. Whereas the left or more progressive side of the voices are not being heard very well.
But, you know, on that, you know, Mark Carney has obviously moved the Liberals more to a Paul Martin, blue liberal, progressive, conservative business
Brian Mulroney-ish.
He's almost like a progressive conservative in some ways, people would say. But, you know, it has polarized into a two-party choice, at least in English Canada, in the last election. And the polling would suggest that that is a possibility of a more permanent state of affairs. Are you worried about that potentially happening? Because we're seeing it with provincial Liberal parties not really existing in BC, in Alberta, in Saskatchewan. It has become binary in those places. Could this be a national trend?
I don't think so. I hear the analysis and what happens here in BC and in Alberta and places where voters ultimately feel like they have two choices. At the federal level, being such a massive and diverse country, the idea of more than two parties has been our reality for more than 80 years, and for good reason. And I would suggest that there's a lot difference between us and the US in terms of how they run their elections. But the number one complaint I hear from citizens in the US is that lack of choice, that they feel like, do we reward these guys? They weren't that great. A two-party system actually weakens things a bit. And our history has been in minority parliaments, which we have right now. And this is an interesting part of this race that doesn't get discussed much, and what the NDP will be able to do in the next few years, is that the multi-party facet of where our parliament, under our system and how it works, has an ability to bring in a lot of voices that in a two-party system, I think really just get drowned out because parties will ultimately fixate on their very most core members, like they do in the US, to the absence of anybody else in the conversation. So if I had a nickel for every time people said the NDP was done and it wasn't going to be a real thing anymore, I'd be pretty wealthy. The party will resurface, it will have a resurgence, and I think the leader is the first obvious and most important step in that.
So on that, I mean, easy to say you need a leader who can connect. Jagmeet Singh did resonate, to a degree his first time round, but even in his first election, lost half the caucus from where Tom Mulcair left it, and then erosion down to this point over the course of the coming elections. He played to that urban progressive set of values. maybe at the expense of some of the working class support you had. A lot of southwestern Ontario, for example, just went blue. A lot of NDP seats went blue in the last election.
Yeah.
I mean, where does the party need to go on that? Does it need to kind of pick to get back to sort of the class-based working class trade union sort of core focus, or the urban progressive value set? I mean, because sometimes those are at odds.
Yeah. This isn't unique to Canada. We've seen in other Western democracies, there's been and I think social media plays into this a little bit, and some other factors, where we've seen working class people less and less associate themselves with left-wing or progressive parties, even though a lot of the things that working class people rely on, like public health care, affordable childcare, a fair wage, all of those things are things that New Democrats consume ourselves with constantly. I think there has been a disconnect which can be repaired. Although I would caution, I think one of the things that really anchored down in a negative way the party going into the last election was its association, frankly, to the last government, to Mr. Trudeau in particular, who I can speak to as a Western Canadian, was wildly popular at first, but incredibly unpopular by the end. I understand why the caucus did it. I understand why the leadership made the decision to get things done, like dental care and pharmacare, big, important things. The political cost of being associated to that brand, more so than Mr. Carney was, because I guess he wasn't there, was devastating. Really, really hurt us, particularly with working class people who had just been, frankly, just totally turned off Mr. Trudeau and anything associated to him.
So how do you navigate this now? We've seen, Avi Lewis is a name potentially for the leader, Heather McPherson, Yves Engler, who's an activist in Montreal. He is out there saying he's going to run. You don't have sort of the toxic asset of the later days of the Trudeau PMO. Pierre Poilievre is no longer sort of the main character in Canadian politics every day. But the NDP is really squeezed on this without party status, without presence. I mean, any sense of where they go with the leadership to sort of get back to sort of relevance in the daily conversation about Canadian life?
Yeah, those last two things are really important. For people who don't understand our system, I know all of your viewers do, but not having party status means you're almost essentially shut out of question period. There's certain funding things. The party has a lot of repair to do on that side in terms of raising money again. I think, though, the upside is that the space, we talked about this a bit earlier, the space available to the left and even the center of Mr. Carney right now on big issues like healthcare, funding, our systems and our services to Canadians, Indigenous relations and reconciliation, climate change, something that we used to really concern ourselves about because half the country is so regularly on fire. I think a lot of those things are going to be back in people's minds, and people will be looking for a voice to project that, not just the single issue that we had, not almost, but almost single issue we had last campaign, which is who can deal with Mr. Trump. Mr. Poilievre suffered because he kind of talked like Mr. Trump sometimes, unfortunately, and that became such a unifying issue for a lot of Canadians. They got worried about Mr. Poilievre. They were terrified of what Mr. Trump was doing. Mr. Carney became the choice. That won't be next time, and I think that space to the left is wide open and available. A vigorous, strong, and connected leader and party can see a resurgence. And David, we're double our poll results from the last election already in the polling that I'm reading.
But that's still 13%, right? Yeah.
Hey, man, when you were coming from 6, 13
I
was
hear
pretty good. Now the question is getting up to, to the next level, which I think a new leader will be able to do.
Right. So, in the 30 seconds we've got left, I don't know if you have any intentions of getting back into this, but I mean, if you don't run, if you're not interested, I mean, have you got a horse in this race, even though it's only day one? Who do you think should it go?
No, not yet. I mean, those two candidates, well, Heather and Avi that you named, I think will be likely the strongest. I think there are a few other names that have been phoning around that could be incredibly interesting. But no, I haven't. I haven't picked anybody. See, that's why we need cliffhangers, and people need to tune back into your show is to find out. There's some really, really interesting and smart, capable people that are kicking the tires right now, and I think that's going to be something that will make this race quite exciting. And we will not suffer from low expectations. I think we're going to crack right through those and do something good. Are
they electable? I mean, Heather McPherson has a seat. Avi Lewis has run a couple of times, and he's never won a seat in Parliament, and now he wants to be leader, right? You know what I mean? Like, it really does help to be in the House of Commons if you're going to be a national leader.
It does, and it so too does that electability is obviously a critical factor that you're looking for when you're looking at a leader. It's also, what do we think the questions are going to be? What are Canadians going to be asking for come the next election, and who can best answer those questions?
Nathan Cullen, always appreciate the time. That's former NDP MP Nathan Cullen. Thank you, sir.
Take care.
Well, today the federal NDP is officially launching its leadership race after a devastating defeat in the last federal election. Former leader Jagmeet Singh resigned from that role after losing his seat in that election, and he wasn't the only one who lost his spot in Parliament. The NDP went into the election with 24 MPs. They came away with just 7 MPs, with the party receiving just 6.3% of the vote. Candidates looking to throw their name in as the party's next leader will have some hurdles to clear, including paying a $100,000 entry fee and gathering 500 signatures from party members. The leadership campaign is set to last for about 7 months, and the results will be announced at the party's convention at the end of March. All right, the Power Panel is back to talk about this leadership contest. Supriya Dwivedi, Lisa Raitt, Cheryl Oates, and Shachi Kurl. Cheryl, let's start with you, the rare person who has won an election as a New Democrat, served in a New Democrat government. What do your federal cousins need to do to get back to a competitive, relevant position right now?
Yeah, and just for the record, I've also lost a lot. I've lost more than I've won, actually.
Most people in politics do.
Losing NDP campaigns. And I think, like any campaign, we really have to look at the campaign and look at the lessons learned and apply it going forward. And that goes for leadership candidates, the infrastructure of the party, and of course, the voting members. And as a member of myself, I'm looking for more than aspirational messages in the next campaign. I don't want to be just Canada's conscience. I want to be government in waiting. I want the NDP to come back as the official opposition. And to do that, we need to start talking to people the way that they talk. So talking to people the way that they talk around their dinner table, the way that they talk around at Tim Hortons, in words that they use. And I think we have sometimes, because we love policy and we love being policy wonks, just come in like a little too high and a little too hot and a little too aspirational for real, regular people to connect with. And we've seen that in the loss of some of the working class voters. So I think it's a question, not just for the candidates, but for the members this time around. What do you want this party to be? And then voting along those lines.
So, Shachi, the math, though, is hard here, right? Like that election, I mean, that's an autopsy that we just showed there from the last election. And I think it was Angus Reid, your company, that said only 13% would consider voting NDP. Am I right on that? Yeah, definitely consider.
Which isn't even definitely vote.
Right.
It's definitely consider. And yeah, that's 1-3, not 3-0. And, you know, when Jagmeet Singh was elected in 2017 and proceeded to make the party, and a lot of what he talked about around identity politics, the party itself really lost its identity or put itself into the throes of an identity crisis with Canadian voters. There was a piece, I think, on CBC.ca yesterday that sort of talked about how challenging the party is going to have a time in terms of, for example, drawing back union voters. And it referenced sort of a lukewarm reception outside some manufacturing plants this time a year ago as an early warning sign that all is not well. I can tell you, I've been doing polling for the last 3 years that shows that private sector union members have been split, if not 50-50, then sometimes tilting even further away from the NDP in a split between the CPC and the NDP on which party best represents their needs and stands up for their needs. That is devastating to the party whose roots are very much in the working class. They have to figure out a way to get the working class back. And I think it goes far beyond messaging. It goes far beyond talking about policy. It actually goes to having a very long, dark look in the mirror and figuring out, you know, what does the party stand for and who does the party represent in 2025 and, more importantly, in 2027 or 2029?
Right, and you can see that shift. When I was at the big map on election night, Supriya, southwest from Hamilton to Windsor, blue, right? You saw a lot of that in that part of Ontario in particular. But look, you were in a liberal government, worked in a liberal government that gobbled up a lot of progressives and tacked to the left to get a lot of votes there. With where Mark Carney has repositioned the Liberals, Nathan Cullen was on the show earlier saying there's room for growth back on that side of the progressive ledger of Canadian policy. How do you view it for the NDP?
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Cullen. I mean, the current iteration of the Liberal Party is not really a progressive party. It's a progressive conservative party, sure, but it's not a left of center government in any real substantive way. So there's huge opportunity for the NDP to sort of come out, out of the gate with this, with a leader who is willing to meet the moment and to really be a thorn in the Liberals' side going forward, to point out all of the ways that the NDP would provide for progressive solutions to some of these problems that we're talking about. I appreciate what Cheryl said from the onset about, and to be fair, I don't think this is just an NDP thing. I think progressives generally, we tend to use language that is, not normal or
a bit
not
elite,
the way people,
a bit too elite.
Yeah. So I think, speaking the way people actually speak is very important. But I don't think that should mean abandoning core values like, the fight for freedom of choice, or the fight to ensure that like trans kids aren't getting picked on. I think there's a way to talk about these issues where a regular average, family around the dinner table, if presented with, well, we can either be jerks about it or we can not be jerks. More often than not, Canadians will choose the not be jerks route, right? And so it's just a matter of being able to string a proper coherent set of messages in a way that the Canadian public, or at least a good fraction of them, will be receptive to hearing. But I think they really need to figure out what it is that they want to be. Do you just want to be the conscience of Parliament, or is government the goal? Because if government's the goal, then there has to be a lot more introspection, and I think reach out to some folks that they may have not welcomed into the fold previously, to try and craft that path forward.
But Lisa, we've seen Avi Lewis's name mentioned as a possible leadership candidate. Heather McPherson, of course, who's an Edmonton MP. Eve Engler, who's an activist in Montreal, has been mentioned. That would be on the progressive side of the ledger. You're into battles for urban seats with that kind of a direction, I would say. And Pierre Poilievre has, in the 8.1 million votes, I believe it is, they got last time, they went after a lot of blue-collar private sector union voters and got them away from the NDP. Do you risk getting squeezed out if you go down that path? I mean, what is the path back for the NDP here to sort of like a prominent third party?
Yeah, they're not going to ask for my advice on what the path back is. But I think they should take Cheryl's advice. I think she gave some really good advice at the top. I am struck by the rules that they've put in place, because in the rules, they're clearly trying to think about what's going to come up during this competition between now and March, when they choose who their leader is. They're very clear on the fact that you're not going to be allowed to use the resources if you're a sitting member of Parliament, for example. And if they had as many rules around who could actually nominate an individual in Elections Canada, we wouldn't have a 200 person ballot in any kind of election, because they're really trying to make sure that they're covering off a broad spectrum of who they view as their member. Maybe that's the secret sauce. Maybe that's where they're going to be able to spread that net a lot wider in order to bring more people in who are interested, because that leadership candidate better have their spreadsheet ready, trying to figure out who is who and where do they fit in, and do I have enough from this part of the world, and do I have enough in this kind of category? And I commend them for it. It's not something we would do as conservatives, but they certainly are trying to make sure that they hit all aspects of their leadership. And they're kind of anticipating, I think, that there may be some contentious issues that are going to arise as they go through.
No, I don't think there's any doubt of that. Anybody going into a leadership right now in this sort of political cauldron, you're going to face that. But, Cheryl, to circle back to your kind of blueprint that you laid out at the beginning, when I look at the broad spectrum of New Democrat politicians who are not like over the horizon of their political career, like Wab Kinew is the guy who stands out, right? As someone who speaks to people plainly, good communicator, but obviously not running this time round. I mean, and who knows if he ever will. But like in the absence of someone like Premier Kinew getting into federal politics, I mean, who on the big roster of potentials do you think are the obvious frontrunners to execute the plan you laid out?
Yeah, I mean, I would say to those who are voting across the country, look west. Like, we have two NDP governments. We have British Columbia, we have Manitoba, we have strong NDP opposition in Saskatchewan and in Alberta. The party has had huge success recently in Western Canada, and that is because the message and the offer has been infused with a healthy amount of pragmatism, and in the prairie instances, a healthy amount of prairie populism. And that kind of language resonates with voters. It's not that we have to give up our values or change our offer to Canadians. It's that we're talking to them in words that they understand, in offers that they understand, in things that will change their lives today. And I think that the federal party could really benefit from someone who is not just aware of that, but maybe entrenched in that.
So Shachi, on that, there's another P word thrown into the conversation, pragmatism. Right? And this was part of Mark Carney's pitch in the election, that he was pragmatic, right? That he's not going to be too ideological and will move as is necessary. We have seen a polarization, in politics with people digging in.
I know panel today.
It's hard to avoid it on a political show. But is there an appetite for that kind of just pragmatism, that practical I don't mean common sense in the, slogan type thing, but, in the common vernacular, just to approach politics that way, from a non-ideological perspective?
I think if you're a New Democratic sympathizer, voter, politician, would-be candidate, pragmatism right now has to be defined by how do you grow the party back, not how do you take back 24 seats, or how do you look at yourself as contention for a government in waiting, or ever being able to form government, or any of those things, or even about electing a rock star leader. I think it's quite notable that the past NDP voter, those who actually still voted, that 6.4% who voted NDP at the end of April, is a group that is split between whether the party's best days are ahead of it or behind it. But those who are most optimistic actually tag a lot of that to having the right leader in place. And it's that emphasis on leadership, I think, at this stage, rather than the how do we talk or where does the party go, that strikes me among that base. But really, what is pragmatism for the NDP in late 2025, early 2026? Is it about just getting more MPs elected? Is it about getting more members signed up? Is it about nudging Liberal policy in a leftward or more progressive direction? I think and I go back to what I said earlier, there's a lot more fundamental building at this stage about what does success actually look like? What does existence even look like before you get to what does electoral success look like?
Right, yeah, but to build on Cheryl's point, bad result federally, but provincially, very strong across the country. If you go across and look at the composition of legislatures, the NDP are first or second in more than the Liberals are right now. We've got about a minute left. Quick last thoughts from Supriya and then Lisa.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think a lot of smart things were said. If I were the NDP right now, and you're in the middle of a race, you want as many people to be excited about this race as possible. And I think that means, to Sachi's point, getting as many folks out there to sign up and be part of the process. And that's how you can, claw your way back to relevance.
Lisa?
And I'd like to see some NDPs that I sat with in the House of Commons come back. I think about Daniel Blakey. I thought he was an excellent member of Parliament. I know he's busy in Manitoba now, but there's going to be a lot of folks out there who are incredibly competent who should put their names in as well and show the rest of the world what the party is and what they're made of.
I saw Mr. Blakey in Huntsville at the Premier's Conference, and I think he's quite happy right now as a member of Premier Canu's staff. I don't know if he's keen to get back into federal politics, but there we are. You're right, he was a very good parliamentarian. All right, we got to leave it there, gang. Thanks so much to the Power Panel, Supriya Dwivedi, Lisa Raitt, Cheryl Oates, and Shachi Kurl.